In the top east-hand corner of the Commonwealth, across the bridge from Coastal Cottage, is the Mahkra Fishpacking plant. There is a lot going on outside this plant, which we can explore before we enter. Below the bridge that leads from Coastal Cottage to the plant, you find a door that leads to a hideout. Inside the hideout, you find a number of feral ghouls as well as a fusion core. There's some random minor loot in this place, nothing amazing. You do find a table with a bunch of skeletons around it. The wall is packed with nuclear barrels, so be sure to come with power armor or a hazmat suit. And this explains why there are so many skeletons and feral ghouls in this hideout. Back outside, when you leap up on top of the bridge and continue onwards towards the plant, we find a big red truck. This is interesting because I haven't seen very many of these, and on the side it says Red Rocket. So it looks like a refueling vehicle for the Red Rocket truck stops. To the right, you often come across a Mirelurk Queen. That's right, a Mirelurk Queen is guarding this plant. She can be tricky at lower levels, but if you're above level 50, you should be able to take her out without much of a problem. When you finally make it to the plant, it is awfully quiet. The front area looks like it's been fortified with ramps, sandbags, and shipping containers arranged in such a way to provide protection. This is something we typically find of raiders, but there's no one here until you find the corpses. There are a lot of raider corpses all over the ground outside the plant. And as you explore the exterior, you find them over and over again. What exactly went on here? Well, it's good to fully explore the exterior of this building before we enter. When facing the plant, if you go towards the left-hand side, you find a series of catwalks that lead to the roof. Using the catwalk to get to the roof, we find more dead raiders. Here was the sniper. We find a sniper rifle and ammunition. In the back corner, we also find a hatch that leads into the plant. We'll come back out through this hatch later. Within sight of the catwalk, you find a legendary glowing ghoul stranded in the middle of the water, standing on top of a floating crate. There's a sunken ship nearby and a bunch of other ghouls in this area. If you explore the southern side of the plant, you find a separate building detached from the main plant. Once you pick the locked door, the inside is really weird. It has another building inside this building. It's kind of like a trailer. You walk up into it, and here you find a model robot kit. Activate the kit to build the model robot, and you have another one to add to your collection. Moving further to the very tip of the coast, you'll find a rowboat with an orange plastic pumpkin inside. Just a few steps away is a bottle with a message in it. Bottle message, difficult to kill. Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs. This, savvy viewers will recognize as a quote from Die Hard. Bruce Willis says this exact line when climbing through ventilation shafts in the Nakatomi Tower.
Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs.
But what does it mean in the game? Well, it's a little cryptic. It doesn't really have a lot to say. When you loot the message, you get a new miscellaneous quest, and if you track it, a new icon appears on your map. Get out of your power armor if you're in it, otherwise you'll sink to the bottom and you'll never get it again. And swim out to sea. The marker floats on the water not very far away from the plant, and there's nothing here. You have to dive to the bottom. At the bottom, you find a skeleton in a bathtub next to a steamer trunk. The trunk has a little bit of ammunition and a few weapons, which we typically find in a trunk. And the skeleton in a bathtub has a teddy bear. Now, what could this mean? Well, my first instinct is that something insidious went on. We find a rowboat next to the bottle. We find a corpse in a bathtub next to a trunk. Here's what I think happened. The murderer invited the victim to the coast near the fishpacking plant using this note. Once here, he murdered his victim. Here's where you have to stretch your imagination a little bit. He then put a bathtub and a steamer trunk in his rowboat, put the body in the bathtub, rowed out to sea, and dumped them all into the ocean. The skeleton magically remained inside the bathtub, and the steamer trunk landed on its feet. There you go. That's my best guess as to how this thing came to be. What I don't get is why the message is in a bottle. Okay, so you get your victim to the coast, you kill him, you find the note on his body, I guess, and then you roll it up and put it in a bottle and then stick the bottle in the sand. It's not something you typically put in a message in the bottle situation. You're stranded at sea, you need to get a message to somebody, maybe you're saying your last will and testament, or you're telling a story, or you're telling someone you love them. You don't send a message saying, hey, meet me at such and such place at such and such time. It seems like a strange message to find in a bottle. At any rate, that is my best guess. Moving on inside, and we again see a bunch of raider corpses. The raiders appear to have tried to defend the entrance of the plant. You find a forklift, earth-moving equipment, sandbags, more packing containers, and a lot of raider corpses. This must have been a big headquarters for a raider gang, similar to the Corvaga assembly plant. But who killed all these raiders? Well, this top floor consists of a series of connected catwalks attached to rooms, and then the ground cement floor. Moving on up through the catwalks, we find our first terminal. This terminal tells us what this fish packing plant did before the war. They imported and exported fish, and then packed it. Because we couldn't have gotten that from the name of the place. The plant imports cod, haddock, Boston blue, and flounder. The biggest import is cod, with 125,000 pounds in July, 130,000 pounds in August, and 145,000 pounds in September. The supplies all increased month over month or remained steady except for their supply of haddock. In July, their supply increased from the previous month, but every month after that, the supply for haddock decreased. What's confusing about this is they have another entry labeled exports, and they export cod, haddock, Boston blue, and flounder. Now, maybe I just don't understand how a fish packing plant works. Maybe one of my viewers who has worked at one or who understands the industry better can explain it to me. But why would you import and then export the exact same product? I would think that if they're packing fish, because maybe they're a cannery, and they're canning fish or packing fish to send out to stores to sell, that they would want a variety of different fishes coming from all over the globe to give their customers variety. So they would import fish, I would think, from places where they can't get that fish locally, right? So their imported fish would be exotic fish. Now their exported fish should all be locally caught fish, only fish that you find in the Boston area. I would assume that they would get this from local fishermen, or maybe they would have their own fishing detachment themselves. So they could can and pack locally caught fish to send to supermarkets, and since they already have the infrastructure set up to can and pack fish, they would import more exotic fish to send to supermarkets. But that's not what we see here. In fact, we see the exact same 4 fish, cod, haddock, Boston blue, and flounder, being both exported and imported. Now, you could say, well, Oxhorn, it's obvious what this means. The fish comes into the plant just packages the fish, and then the plant exports the fish or sells it to distributors. This would mean that the plant only packages, they don't have a fishing detachment, they don't actively go out and buy from local fishermen. And that would make sense except for the import and export numbers don't match up. For example, in July, they imported 125,000 pounds of cod, but in July they exported 110,000 pounds of cod. Did they really lose 15,000 pounds worth of cod during the canning and packaging process? 15,000? Similarly, in July, they say that their import of haddock has increased from the previous month, but in July they say that their export of haddock has decreased slightly. How can your import of one fish in 1 month increase, while at the same time your export decrease? That would leave a whole lot of haddock lying around your facility that you haven't exported. So this leaves me with a few questions. It seems like a fully functioning operational fish packing plant. They're doing their business. Maybe I just don't understand the fish packing business well enough to be able to interpret what's going on here. As you continue along the catwalks and containers up here, you find the second terminal. The first entry is a note about the Boston blue. We learn that they do indeed buy bluefish from local fishermen. They just signed a contract with 2 local fishermen who agreed to supply the fish packing plant with half of their bluefish. This is a big win for Mahkra because the bluefish that they buy from these fishermen can't be bought by their competitors. It also helps clarify our question from before. They're buying fish from fishermen. Is that what they mean by import? Because that seems like a strange usage of the word. When I go to the shop to buy something, I'm not importing anything. I'm buying something. They're buying fish from local fishermen. They're not importing that fish. They're buying it. Why would they list this Boston Blue as an import in the terminal? That just doesn't make sense to me. The next message is also from Jane, and it's to George saying, I'm leaving early. The fumes from the delivery trucks are giving me a migraine. Apparently, the ventilation fans in this upper floor were not working, and they needed to get maintenance to come and fix it. We learned from the previous terminal that their import and export of haddock had gone down in August, and Jane says that they're working on a new contract to get more haddock. The final entry is also from Jane, and it appears on the day that the bombs dropped. It's an internal message to everyone working at the plant. She says, everyone hears the sirens outside, right? Can someone please tell me what's going on? We learn from her that she and everyone else in this plant were locked in. There's a basement to this plant or a lower floor because she asks Dave, who works there, to bring her up a Nuka-Cola. But this is really weird. Why would anyone lock them in this plant? Who would lock them in the plant? They're the employees. They're the ones running this facility. Who could possibly lock them in this plant but themselves? Quote, they said to lock up and wait until we hear back from them. Who is they? Who is them? This terminal isn't telling us anything. Did the military tell them to lock themselves inside the plant until they hear back? Or maybe it was big-time executives at some sort of Mahkra executive headquarters that locked them inside? That doesn't make sense either, because I could understand it if they got a terminal message or a phone call from a bigwig executive saying, hey, stay inside the building. But that's not what happened. Somebody physically went to the building and locked them inside. Who could have done that? Moving on along the catwalk, and we find a ladder that leads to that roof access hatch that we found earlier. Continuing all the way around brings us to the bottom level. Be careful as you explore this main floor, as it has been booby-trapped by the raiders, which leads finally to a big square hole in the middle of the floor. This is an elevator. Pushing the button brings the platform up to ground level, and we find another raider corpse. Taking the lift all the way to the bottom, and at the bottom we find another raider decapitated, lying on a conveyor belt covered in fish. What's weird about this is that the bombs dropped over 200 years ago. How are these fish here? Shouldn't they completely have liquefied by now and evaporated and turned to dust? In fact, if you bring companions with you down here, they often complain about the smell. This would make sense if, say, power had been cut to the Mahkra Fishpacking plant for like a week, and then all of the inventory has started to rot, sure. But it's been 200 years. Surely anything biological has rotted and any smell has long since vanished. An opening in the wall leads to what appears to be like a cafeteria area. We find a number of skeletons on the floor, beer bottles, lunch pails. It looks like a relaxing area for... What? Oh, shoot! Well, ladies and gentlemen, we learn why there are so many dead raiders. The Institute raided the Mahkra Fishpacking plant. Why would they be here, of all places? Now, we know from previous encounters that they do this all the time. The Institute went to University Point and killed all the settlers there because they were looking for some kind of technology to make their fusion reactor work better. We found them at the Boston Mayoral Shelter, possibly because they thought that it was a bunker, not a shelter, and maybe it housed some sort of pre-war tech that they were looking for. But a fish packing plant? What could they possibly want here? Maybe, and this is pure speculation, but maybe this pre-war fish packing plant had some sort of fish cooling system, like a big refrigeration unit, or maybe some sort of chemical that kept fish fresh. Maybe the Institute would be looking for something like that for their Gen 3 synth program. We know that Gen 3 synths are made from human DNA. They likely have a lot of excess DNA in big storage vats somewhere at the Institute. Where do they keep all of that bone, blood, muscle, and other DNA that they use to create the Gen 3 synths? Well, surely it has to be kept fresh. Maybe they came here looking for some sort of refrigeration additive that they could use to improve the way that they store the components needed to build Gen 3 synths. Continuing down into the depths brings us to a conveyor belt that winds throughout the facility. At the top here we find a huge stick stack of aluminum trays. This is a great place to find aluminum. It's useful for those of you doing settlement builds or for upgrading a lot of weapons, but it's exceptionally useful for somebody spending a lot of time in power armor. It's a great place to go if you need to repair your power armor but you don't have any more aluminum. You can walk away with upwards of 80 different pieces, and they respawn when the cell resets after 30 or so days. Continuing on, and we stumble upon even more Gen 3 synths. In this room, there's a Protectron charging terminal, and when I came here, I actually found a legendary Protectron. You can hack the terminal to activate the Protectron and then use the Protectron override software that you found from Watts Electronics to turn the Protectron into a temporary companion. Legendary Protectrons like this are really powerful. Moving forward leads us to one final large room with a lot going on. There's a catwalk with synths on it that winds back into the facility. There are steps that go upwards towards the conveyor belt with more synths on it. And then there's another room underneath the steps. In this room we also find the final terminal for the Mahkra Fishpacking plant. It looks like Dave was in charge down here. He sends a message to Larry, either an employee or maybe a manager at the fishpacking plant. Looks like someone bumped the thermostat, which raised the temperature, almost making a few batches of fish go bad. Looks like they were lucky though, nothing got spoiled, but Dave says, hey, let me know if you want the scientists to come down and test a few batches before we pack them. Looks like they had a few scientists working here. And this might explain why we find skeletons in that hideout under the bridge. If you remember, in that hideout, one of the skeletons was wearing a lab coat. Maybe these are the Mahkra Fishpacking scientists. In the final entry, Dave tells Jan on the top floor, sorry, I can't bring you a Nuka-Cola like you asked. They've shut off the main lift, so it looks like we're gonna be stuck down here. Now, whoever shut off the power to the main lift must have turned it back on because you got it to work, or maybe it was the raiders that found a way to turn it back on. At any rate, the people who were working in the bottom basement area were stuck down there and died down there. We find their skeletons all over the place. The people who were working on the top floors also died on the top floors because they were locked out of leaving the plant. My bet is that scientists who were working here at the Mahkra Fishpacking plant somehow shut off the main lift power, locked the doors, and told everyone to stay inside while they go and investigate. They ran off, but everything was so chaotic that they hid themselves in the hideout in that secret door underneath the bridge. A few of them died from the radiation, which is why we find their skeletons and the lab coats, but some of them were turned into feral ghouls whom you had to kill. That, I think, is the best explanation for how all of these people got locked in the plant and died. Going down into the floor underneath the stairs, we find a settler suspended by chains. My bet is that the raiders who had lived here were in the process of torturing a settler when the synths arrived and wiped them out. So I really don't feel too bad for these dead raiders. In the very back, we find a table next to a dead raider, and on the table is Tesla Science Magazine issue number 4. This makes energy weapons inflict 5% more critical damage, which is going to be great for my Gatling laser. Heading back and up the stairs, we find the exit. This lower area does a big loop. You come in, you go down, you loop through the basement, then you come back up these steps. But before you leave, go back down the steps and then use a jetpack to jump through the window that leads to another catwalk. This catwalk has a few skeletons and some more dead raiders. At the very top, we find a dead raider that has the Mahkra facility's key. This key opens up a cage that has more ammunition and loot inside. Following the catwalk the rest of the way leads you back out to that first area where the synths first attacked you, which leads you ultimately back to the lift. Now, if you take the ladder to go out the hatch on the roof, you find that the synths have appeared on the roof as well. You've got to clear all of the synths on the roof. And then once they're dead, head on back to the catwalks that you previously explored to kill all of the synths that are there. As you try to leave out the front entrance, you get harassed by a huge group of synths, some of which are legendary. This is a great place to go at higher levels if you're looking for heavy synth armor, or to have a chance to drop some legendary synth armor. I found 2 or 3 legendary synths here, each of which dropped a piece of legendary synth armor. It's also great for those of you who sided with the Institute if you just need a quick restock of ammunition and aluminum, because you can run in, run out, and you don't have to fight anyone. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the full story of the Mahkra Fishpacking plant. Unlike many pre-war businesses in the Commonwealth, this place was pretty much free from drama. Not a lot of arguments going on, not a lot of scandals, no murders, no betrayals. They imported fish, they exported fish, they worked well with each other, but it looks like at the very end someone, possibly the scientists that worked at the company, locked everybody inside where they all died. What did you think of the Mahkra Fishpacking plant, ladies and gentlemen? Were you surprised by the synths that jumped you in the basement? Can you better explain to me how this fishpacking plant worked and how they could be importing and exporting the exact same types of fish? Let me know in the comment section below. I read all of your comments and I use your comments as inspiration for my new videos. If you'd like to talk about the Mahkra Fishpacking plant with other like-minded individuals on my Oxhorn community Discord server, be sure to join using the invitation link that I've included in the description of this video. And if you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming one of my patrons on Patreon. Patreon subscribers gain access to a private channel on my Discord server, as well as a bunch of other cool Oxhorn perks. But more than anything, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video today. Thank you for watching from the bottom of my heart, and I'll see you tomorrow morning bright and early with a brand new video.